Okay, I pushed the button.
Okay, well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. This is Mrs. Waspinator. We just sat and watched the Dungeons and Dragons movie from the year 2000. I've managed to avoid watching it all the way through before. I've seen little bits of it on like the Sci-Fi Channel years ago, but this is the first actual real sitting it with the intent to watch it. And she's a relative newcomer into the world of Dungeons and Dragons and such, so I noticed you had taken some notes. What kind of stuff was standing out to you about this masterpiece? This is the 2000 movie. It's starring Jeremy Irons and Marlon Wayans and that kid from Lois and Clark. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
So Birch. First of all, without looking at my notes,
Okay.
this was not a good movie
No.
by any standards, really. Even if I had been young enough to enjoy this type of thing, not having seen anything like it before at that age, I still don't think that I would have liked it.
I think if I was like a certain level of adolescence between like the ages of 8 to 12, if I had been that age when this came out, I probably would have enjoyed the hell out of it. But I was like 19 or 20 when it came out, and so therefore, yeah, this was like 4 or 5 years after Dragonheart had come out, and like made at the same time that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was being made, and you can tell because the special effects are just that kind of top notch.
Two of my biggest problems with it were the writing was just god awful. The plot, the dialogue, the little situations that you have, they're all taken from something else. I think they would have had better luck hiring 20-something writers who were closer to their own youth than 40-year-old writers who maybe understood what they thought the genre was better. Because it was all used the Indiana Jones sequence that you said looked like the Nickelodeon game show.
Yeah, when he's in the maze of the guild
which
maze.
Which is really just like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
A lot of the combat staging I found was very stiff, and like this is the choice they made. Like there's a big bar fight, and for some reason the girl mage Matilda or Marina or whatever her name was is like awkwardly crawling across the floor. Like no, just get up, scuttle over there, grab it. It goes a lot faster. She
still had to be wide-eyed the entire time.
Yes, you notice that?
Yes.
Or I was trying to bring up like the elf they had, Nora. Was it? You don't remember any of that?
I do not.
Like the entirety of her acting and the entirety of the characterization for that character was basically.
She was a stern commander, though.
Yeah, but see, I was like watching this, and like I'm looking at it from the point of view of like being a dungeon master, being into D&D. And I'm thinking, like, how well is this conveying what D&D is like in any way?
Right. Beyond it being a bad movie in the first place.
Well, a lot of DMs would be damned lucky if they could pull off a full campaign story arc to completion that is even half as good as this. I'll say that. The fact that the character motivation for, like, the core group was they just happened to be there. Is rather common in a lot of your like entry level normie type D&D games out there.
Sure.
In terms of the character classes and the world it's in, like as I said, this doesn't mean anything to you, but it really felt like this is supposed to be set in the Kingdom of Glantry in the Mystara setting. Between the fact that the kingdoms of magocracy and non-mages are all second-class citizens and all that kind of stuff. That's straight out of how Glantry was set up, and like even down to the way the characters were, like the humans had different classes, but the dwarf and elf were basically just dwarves and elves. They even had this whole thing where like when the guy's being healed and the elder elf guy,
Doctor Who,
it was all like elves don't use magic, we are magic,
right?
Which it makes it like there's a thing where Mystara was the basic D&D world setting. That's the version of D&D where class is race. So you need to play, if you want to play a thief or a mage, you have to be a human.
Right, gotcha.
But otherwise elves are elves. And AD&D, that's where you can mix and match things. You can have an elf ranger or a human ranger and that kind of stuff. So this between the way the characters are just laid out and just the setting itself, it really felt like this is supposed to be a Mystara world, but for some reason they decided to name it Izmir and just have real hokey, generic, fantasy sounding made up names for places. They had like races in there that like there were no D&D, and nowhere in any D&D book is there a race of purple dudes with a butthole eye in their forehead and a fucking like cone head thing going on at the back. That's not a thing.
What about the things that come out of the ears and like read the chick's mind? Do they have mind reader worms?
Probably there's something akin to that in D&D that like it's that in of itself as a concept is not that like out of, you know, the realms of what you would expect to find in this game. Like, personally, that kind of reminded me maybe a little bit of, like, larval illithid, you know, illithid or mind flayers. They're like these Cthulian alien octopus-headed guys, but their creation cycle is to, like, infect a host with larvae that like eats out their brain and slowly transforms the body into the adult form. I think at least that's in the like.
Are they
the fifth...
mind readers though?
Yes, they are psychic, and so like I can see that fitting into that kind of thing, but it wasn't explicitly that, and I know I can't specifically think of the exact stats of any creature that infests someone's head and then sticks tentacles out your ears to suck girls' brains.
Interesting that in the beginning they have that moment of like, oh, look, they're casting a something spell. She must have cast a something spell.
Yeah.
Or it could have been.
And she used up all of her spell slots in the first 5 minutes of the movie and didn't use magic at all again for the rest of the movie until she got some magic dust.
They also didn't make any further attempts to explain anything like that. So I don't know why they put that part in there that seemed like it was really, you know, too much and unnecessary.
I doubt that it was their intention, but it reads like a joking Easter egg that, yeah, like I said, like her mage character used up all of her spell slots in the first, like, you know, like action sequence, and then since they never stopped to take a long rest, she never was able to recharge her magic, and so that's she's just relying on her arcane skill.
There were a lot of times that I felt like, is this a D&D thing? Because if it's a D&D thing, I'm more likely to forgive it for being in this movie than if it's just another in a long series of weird, poor choices.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There were a lot of poor choices, and sometimes there were poor choices that was a D&D reference. You know, like the Conan movies. Robert Milius's Conan, the first Conan, is a good movie because it's just a loose adaptation of Robert Howard's stories. But Conan the Destroyer, or the reboot they did with Jason Momoa, they come across as terribly cheesy because they're doing a better job at adhering to what those old 1930s pulp stories are. And D&D, despite having like the surface decoration of a Tolkien type of world with elves and halflings. Right. The stories are much more those kinds of pulpy 1930s you know, short story Conan, Solomon Kane, you know, kind of adventures where, oh, you find a lost ruin, we go in, we fight the monster, the end. Yeah. And that doesn't translate well to film or television in a modern day because we read all that as ancient tropes, but for some reason when you're like playing it in person and it's all in your head, it's more forgivable because it's maybe it's an easier framework to work around or something. But I guess does this movie in any at all way inspire you to want to play the game that it's about? Does this make like, oh, I want to do this now and have my own little wacky adventures where I can find a dragon rod and hide it in a princess?
I mean, a little bit.
Okay. That's more than I would have expected to hear.
Look, unfortunately, the characters were bad, and then the acting was bad on top of. If there had been any charisma between these people, and you had any kind of feeling of camaraderie or fun having at any point, they kill off the Wayans with 40 minutes to go in the movie, which seems like an insane thing.
If they're going to kill him off, I would have done it like 20 minutes before the end, right before the final battle.
To give the final battle more meaning or more have the character have more purpose. But I mean, you cut out your only comic relief that early and the only really likable character, honestly.
Well, you know, we're not the first people on YouTube to talk about this movie, and some of the other videos I've seen of other channels talking about this have have mentioned that they find it really jarring that you have this happy-go-lucky, sweet, innocent, childlike comedic relief character be brutally murdered and thrown off a cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah. They find that a little
fucked up.
jarring. Yeah. There's a lot of things
the
also.
The brutality of that scene.
Yeah.
Where the guy's just, I mean, it's the most brutal scene in the whole movie.
Yeah,
It really seems out of place and weird.
There's a couple of other things like otherwise it seems like a kids friendly movie, but then like early on there's a lot of odd sexual shit, where Wayans wants to hit it with the elf and the dwarf guy with the whole and that dwarf dude.
I mean, a lot of that seemed like just trying to give the audience what they want from that era type of thing. Well, people like it when we're gonna hit it.
I want to say if there's a soul to this movie, it's got to be that dwarf character. I mean, he was terrible, but I mean, that would be the soul of this movie. But that's like the way he was used in his lines, and even down to like not really understanding why the hell he's there at all. They're with him and the elf. Like, why are they like acting like they're friends with these guys? Like the human characters, all like, they're attracted to each other, and they've been friends since they were kids. That makes sense. But yeah,
I mean, also the very basic generic plot was ultimately still a little bit confusing for me. Like, I'm not sure why people wanted what or what they thought they were going to do with it, and then at the end when she goes, well, now you're equal because I said so. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm trying to run it through my head. Starts off, Jeremy Irons is trying to make a rod so he can control the dragons, but it doesn't work.
Right.
And so he concocts a plan to just convince the Council of Mages to force the Empress to hand over her dragon-controlling rod that only controls gold dragons. But then because he's his assistant has an imp spy that was spying on her, finds out that there's another red dragon-controlling rod. And so before his agent can get the map, that's when the characters accidentally stumble across this because just randomly they decided to go try to rob a mages guild or a mages school. And so I guess they're trying to get the rod to keep the other guy from getting the rod.
Right. Yeah.
Well, also the one thing that bothered me that relating to the mages school part, that little illusion box, and they open it up in the little dragon illusion.
Yes.
What a total violation of Chekhov's gun. Like, there's numerous violations of Chekhov's gun throughout this entire movie. And if you don't understand the idea of Chekhov's gun, it's an old adage for playwrights that if you introduce an object in the first act, you better fucking use it by the end of the third act. Otherwise, there's no point in putting it in their movies, plays, TV shows. They have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of budget to tell their story, so they need to be lean. Even if there's aspects about something that's slowly paced, there's a reason for that, is because they're wanting you as the audience member to absorb something from that. But you don't just waste time introducing gimmicks that never pay off.
I mean, it's a fun.
Like Marlon
makes
Wayans,
the scene more fun.
Like, what if Marlon Wayans could have gotten away from that dude by whipping it out of his little bag and distracted him long enough to like do the thing? But no, instead he was brutally murdered after having already been humiliated by being dumped in oatmeal.
Which also doesn't seem necessary either.
Yeah. Character motivation for the other guys. I said it during the movie. I will. There's one thing I will give it extremely high points for, and might actually give this an actual official channel recommendation to watch it. They didn't invoke the power of family.
They did not.
Not once.
They did not.
Yes.
They did kind of try to invoke the power of friendship.
But kind of.
It didn't really work.
No. I'm also confused about them dying at the end like that.
Yeah. Was that a suicide cult?
Thing, or when they were transported in the map, that was a drastically different effect than what they were shown doing, where they're incinerated and then you see their spirits flying off.
Sunbeams and meld with everything else in the universe.
And then Home Dude doesn't get to be knighted, and people are just gonna be they're gonna inconvenience all those, like, like a knighting ceremony is not a minor thing. They've set up catering, like a lot of like people have had to practice their staging of where they're supposed to stand and like hold their little poles and stuff. You have to trumpet players practice for the entry shit, and they're just leaving all those people hanging. Like, that's pretty rude.
If you told me that I I would have more charisma with any group of strangers that I would try to play D&D with, and that any plot line would be less unnecessarily convoluted and much more straightforward, then it might... You can make comparisons to this movie to say, it's not like this, but you can have that fun feeling of finding things and defeating foes and solving puzzles and exploring.
Well, in spite of its ineptness, I feel like it did kind of convey a lot of basic things about D&D, like mage guilds, thieves guilds being a thing.
Yeah.
It had dragons in it. It had dungeons in it.
It did. It had both of those things.
It had Beholder, which is like the big, trademark thing. Never put a Beholder in your OSR game or D&D's gonna sue you, because apparently that's really what D&D is all about as a brand, is the presence of Beholders. Otherwise, everything else is public domain because you can't copyright fucking goblins. But, what other notes do you got? Anything else we haven't brought up here?
Probably not. The blue lipstick was a terrible choice.
That ironically, despite him being thrown off a super tall building, I know from the Sci-Fi Channel that he's back for at least one of the sequels and still has the blue lipstick.
You said a couple things about being Star Wars ripoffs.
There were a couple of Star Wars ripoffs.
The villain music was very Star Wars ripoff. It was burn, 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 burn. You're like, that sounds vaguely familiar as like, this is a bad guy.
I was so just enraptured with Jeremy Irons' acting choices that I didn't really notice the music going on.
It's the other guy.
Oh, okay.
It's not even, it does do it when Jeremy Irons is there also, but it's the other, every time the other guy makes an appearance, he's coming down the stairway, he shows up and, oh no, it's the bad guy. He's gonna get us. And
his ears are all red. No.
We have to play, toss the beach ball with the map or whatever the hell was going on in that scene.
But yeah, I feel like they ripped off Star Wars when early on they all are jumping down a garbage chute to get away from the guys.
Yeah.
And then some of the stuff the elf priest was telling them about the nature of magic.
It was like Yoda-y.
That's it's very reminiscent of the Force. So that also means that it's really just a ripoff of Chi. So I guess this is a Mulan ripoff. Sort of.
I felt like they wanted it to be like 80s, everything was so over exaggerated. But that's not really going to work in 2000 in the best of circumstances.
In some ways, I almost went to go see it in theaters when I was living in Colorado at the time when it was out, and I decided not to because, the trailers just look like ass. But I feel like I kind of missed out on having experienced something. I saw Cole the Conqueror with Kevin Sorbo in the theater. That wasn't any better.
Right.
Not any worse either.
Not only do I not play D&D much, but also it has been 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's hard to... But, it just, it didn't really have anything appealing about it. So it'd be difficult to, it had no emotional connection to what they were doing, it seemed like.
No,
at
yeah.
any point.
The only character that even had any kind of motivation was the wizard chick. The two human thief guys, I guess, Ripley... or Ridley or whatever. Did you catch there's a point where it's like, the not so talented Mr. Ridley?
Yes.
It's like, but I think you would describe him as a multi-class fighter thief because he was working as a thief and had thieves skilled, but he was much more martially trained than say Snails.
Right.
Snails, who obviously is a person who rolls really bad, to explain he's trying to stealth around, but he's like, that's not how you get stealth. And then he had the sneak attack backstab happen to him.
Yeah. I'm also, I realize you couldn't really make a movie out of a D&D game and have it be interesting because of all the stopping and rolling and stuff, right? But there was some moves where
the awkwardness of the combat almost made it like actual D&D combat.
In a lot of places.
Yeah.
But then they throw in moves where he pulls a knife out and then he stabs the guy in the foot and then he flips over and punches him in the face. And I'm like, how many first of all, how many rolls did that whole sequence take?
Yeah.
And then, can I do that? Can I ask you?
Well, it depends on what edition of D&D is and what your level is, because like certain classes you can get extra attacks in your round, or like you can exchange movement for action in some instances. So. Or also, there's like reaction attacks. If someone is like moving past you, but they're not attacking you, you can do like a reaction move and do a strike on them. That's like a free action.
But so in the game, while we're playing, I can be like, all right, I want to attack him. And what I want to do is I want to roll over and then stab his foot and then flip backwards and then kick his chin with my heel and then flip sideways from that. And then I'm behind him. Can I do that?
What I would,
and then you tell me
how
how
I would
to roll
do
for
that with
like...
5th edition, what I would say is you'd have to make an athletics check, and if you can make it, if you succeed on it, to represent doing all the flippy,
sure.
Then you get to roll with advantage on your attack to stab him in the foot. Which means that you get to roll 2 dice and take the higher of the 2 numbers, which more guarantees that you'll succeed.
But then after I stab him in the foot, was I able to flip over and punch him in the face? Also, or does that require another?
Yeah, that's
I mean, I don't know. As far as like
some of this stuff's not obviously like it's not ever going to translate entirely properly to a visual medium like that. It's one of the like ironic things about like all the arguments over various games and like whether their rule systems are suck or what's wrong with them. Like all the rule systems are bad because none of them are capable of perfectly representing reality.
Right.
They're not even supposed to. These are games.
Right.
Game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they can be fun, they can be moving, they can be real in-depth. You can learn things from a role-playing game, or you can teach things for the role-playing game. But the optimal word here is still game. So,
either way, I don't think that this film conveyed any of it other than, as you've said, the basic character classes, some of the basic concepts of what the world is going to be
what
like.
the world can be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is great, but I mean, I feel like you could have told me a more entertaining story with more likable characters without any of those budget or special effects.
The effects were special. But... I mean, yeah, like I don't know, like. Obviously, like a lot of people, he's one of the main reasons why it's become a bit of a cult classic is largely because of Jeremy Irons' fucking over-the-top performance.
Incredibly
but the
good.
thing is like a lot of people were doing that, and I kind of wonder if that was because if he's doing this, I guess I need to fucking lean in it really hard, and I'm gonna just squeeze my head and pretend I got tentacles coming out of it.
All of the characters were being very over the top.
There's a moment in the final fight where like the main guy Ridley, he's just got this like crazy look on his face when he's like summoning dragons or whatever.
Yeah. It's just that those people also were not great actors, and so. It's not as fun. If you can't pull off regular, how the hell are you going to pull off over the top? Jeremy Irons can also do real acting.
Yeah.
So for him to go over the top is fun. When you see somebody that you wouldn't buy shoes from, would you like to buy my shoes? No, I don't believe you. I'm not buying that.
Okay, so including both bad guys and good guys, would you say is probably your favorite character in this movie?
That one dragon at the end that ate Jeremy Irons and then didn't die.
Okay. It's not a bad choice.
That was a pretty cool character.
Okay.
I liked the fact that they threw old-ass Doctor Who in there as the old Yoda elf.
Okay.
That guy was fine. I don't know if he fit, but...
12-year-old me would be like, oh, well, obviously the wizard chick, because like, that was like entirely the kind of page I was on back then.
Obviously, yeah.
As in my 40s looking on it, it's got to be Snails.
Snails,
so,
yeah.
But
Snails
with a close
choice,
runner-up there with the dwarf whose name I can't remember, because he was the soul of the movie. I think the Snails thing, like, it kind of shows, like, like, people might joke about it, but, like, if in the Star Wars prequels, if they had stopped and brutally murdered Jar Jar Binks, that would have come across as really bad, I think, so...
Yeah. That was a very, very strange choice. But again, this movie had more poor choices than my life, which is saying a lot.
Yeah, you married me. So on that note, folks, be sure to hit like and subscribe and leave a comment and all that wonderful stuff. And, I don't know, stay waspinated. Hit the button.
Good night.
Good night.